With the heavy oak doors sealed shut, there was no escape. They shoved her toward the empire, beside the monster of the north, a ruthless alpha king no one dared approach. What was supposed to be a cruel joke shifted the moment the beast turned his glowing amber eyes to her. If you dig deep enough into the restricted archives of the Riverdale Library, past the sanitized histories of kings and treaties, you will find the fragmented diaries of Beatrice Alden. Her accounts detail a reality the history books tried to erase. A night in the winter of 1482 that irrevocably tied the human nobility to the feral rulers of the Frost Marches. This is not a fairy tale. It is a testament to how a single moment of aristocratic cruelty altered the fate of a kingdom. The great hall of Riverdale Castle was suffocating beneath the weight of false diplomacy. It was the night of the winter solstice, and the human king Reginald had hosted a feast to sign the first peace treaty in a century with the lycanthrope Pax of the North. The air was thick with the scent of roasted venison, spiced wine, and the undeniable metallic tang of human fear. Beatrice Alden stood near the draughty pillars at the back of the hall, her thin, woolen gown doing little to stave off the biting chill. Once her family name had commanded respect, but after her father, Lord Artan Alden, had been falsely accused of treason and stripped of his lands, Beatrice was reduced to a mere attendant, surviving only on the meager charity of the court. In reality, she was a plaything for the higher-born ladies, a favorite target for their vicious boredom. Chief among her tormentors was Lady Genevieve Croft. Genevieve was a vision in crimson velvet, her neck dripping with rubies, her heart as cold as the frost creeping up the stained glass windows. "Look at him," Genevieve whispered, her breath brushing Beatrice's ear. "He hasn't touched his wine. He just stares. They say he tore the throat out of the previous alpha with his bare teeth." Beatrice didn't need to be told where to look. The entire hall was gravitationally tethered to the man sitting alone at the flank table. Kalen Vargas. I was the Alpha King of the Frost Marches, a man more beast than human, whose name was used to frighten children into obedience. He sat in a high-backed wooden chair, flanked by an expanse of empty seating. No human noble dared to sit within 20 feet of him. His aura was an oppressive physical weight in the room. He was a massive man, broad-shouldered and cloaked in dark, heavy wolf furs that seemed to blend with his dark, unruly hair. Scars tracked across his jawline, disappearing into his collar. He did not speak to King Reginald. He did not smile. He simply watched the room with predatory, unblinking amber eyes, his large hands resting flat on the heavy oak table. "It is a tragedy to see a guest so neglected," Genevieve mused, a wicked smile curling her painted lips. She turned to Beatrice, her eyes glinting with malice. "Beatrice, darling, you are always talking about duty to the crown. I believe it is your duty to keep our honored guest company." Beatrice's blood ran cold. "My lady, please. I am not dressed for the high tables, nor am I of the rank to converse with a visiting king." "Rank?" Genevieve scoffed, stepping closer, her voice dropping to a venomous hiss. "Your father is a debtor, Beatrice, a breath away from the freezing dungeons beneath this very floor. My brother, Lord Harrison, holds the debt. If you do not walk over to that table and take the seat directly to the right of the Alpha King, I will have Harrison call in the debt before the sun rises. Your father will not survive a week in the cold." Beatrice swallowed hard, her throat painfully dry. "He will kill me. The Alpha, they are volatile. He wants to be left alone." "Then you will die a martyr for Riverdale." Genevieve smiled sweetly, pressing a silver goblet of wine into Beatrice's trembling hands. "Go on, or say goodbye to your father." A cluster of Genevieve's sycophants giggled into their embroidered sleeves, watching with hungry, cruel anticipation. They wanted a spectacle. They wanted to see the feral alpha tear a disgraced noblewoman to pieces for daring to enter his space. It was a blood sport, and Beatrice was the bait. Beatrice looked at Genevieve, realizing there was no bluff in the woman's eyes. It was a dare born of pure, unadulterated malice. Taking a shuddering breath, Beatrice gripped the silver goblet. Her knuckles turned white. She turned away from the pillars and began the long, agonizing walk across the stone floor of the great hall. With every step she took, the ambient noise in the hall began to die. It started with the nobles nearest to the Alpha's table, their conversations faltering as they noticed the fragile girl in the faded blue gown approaching the beast. The silence spread like a ripple in a pond. The musicians in the gallery above slowed their playing, the lutes and fiddles bleeding out into a discordant halt. By the time Beatrice was 10 feet away from Kaelin Vargas, the hall was dead silent. The only sound was the crackle of the massive hearths and the soft, rhythmic clicking of Beatrice's worn leather shoes on the stone. She felt the eyes of 100 nobles burning into her back. But worse, far worse, was the suffocating pressure radiating from the man in front of her. As she drew near, the sheer heat coming off Kaelin's body was astonishing, fighting back the winter drafts. He smelled of pine needles, wood smoke, and something dark and metallic that triggered every survival instinct in her human brain. Beatrice stopped beside the empty chair to his right. She didn't dare look at his face. Her hands were shaking so violently she feared she would spill the wine. She reached out, her fingers wrapping around the back of the heavy wooden chair. "Gods, let it be quick," she prayed silently. With a loud, agonizing scrape that echoed off the vaulted ceilings, Beatrice pulled the chair out. She sat down. The silence in the great hall became a living, breathing entity. Across the room, King Reginald paused with a chalice halfway to his mouth. At the back, Genevieve and her cohort leaned forward, eyes wide, waiting for the blood to spray. For 3 agonizing seconds, Kaelin Vargas did not move. He continued staring straight ahead at the high table, a statue of scarred muscle and fur. Then slowly, the Alpha King turned his head. Beatrice kept her eyes glued to the grain of the wooden table, her breath trapped in her lungs. She felt the shift in the air before she felt anything else. A sudden sharpening of the atmosphere, as if a thunderstorm had suddenly materialized inside the room. Kaelin shifted his massive frame, turning his torso fully toward her. The wood of his chair groaned under the sudden movement. Beatrice squeezed her eyes shut, waiting for a massive hand to close around her throat. She waited to be thrown across the room, punished for her insolence, for breaching the invisible boundary that separated apex predators from prey. Instead, she heard a sharp, deep intake of breath. He was smelling her. The sound was raw, animalistic, and startlingly loud in the quiet hall. Kaelin leaned closer, his face hovering mere inches from her neck. The heat of his breath washed over her collarbone, causing a violent shiver to rack her spine. He inhaled again, deeper this time, a low, vibrating rumble beginning to emanate from deep within his chest. It wasn't a growl of anger. It sounded almost like shock. "Look at me," a voice commanded. It was a voice that belonged on a battlefield. It was deep, rough as gravel, and resonated with a power that demanded absolute obedience. Trembling, Beatrice opened her eyes and slowly turned her head. She was immediately met with the most intense, piercing gaze she had ever encountered. Kaelin's amber eyes were not flat or dead. They were a swirling tempest of liquid gold and dark brown. The pupils, slightly dilated, locked onto her face with an intensity that made her dizzy. He was studying every inch of her features, her pale skin, her wide, terrified eyes, the frantic pulse beating at the base of her throat. "Why are you sitting here?" he murmured. His voice was low, meant only for her ears, completely ignoring the hundreds of spectators watching them. I am sorry, Your Grace," Beatrice stammered, her voice barely a whisper. It was commanded of me." Kaelin's golden eyes flicked upward, scanning the hall. With brutal efficiency, his gaze locked onto the cluster of women at the back, landing squarely on Lady Genevieve, who suddenly looked very pale. "Commanded," Kaelin repeated, his jaw tightening. The rumble in his chest shifted, dropping an octave into something dangerous. "They sent you as a jest, a sacrifice to the beast." Beatrice couldn't lie under that gaze. She gave a small, jerky nod. Kaelin looked back at her. He didn't look at her ragged dress or her lack of jewels. He looked as if she were the only living, breathing thing in a room full of ghosts. He leaned in a fraction closer. "Lavender," he whispered, his nose brushing lightly against the air near her jaw. "Rainwater and terror." Before Beatrice could process his bizarre words, heavy footsteps shattered the silence. Lord Harrison Croft, Genevieve's older brother, stepped out from the crowd. He was a tall, arrogant man, emboldened by his wealth and his position in King Reginald's inner circle. Believing the Alpha King was insulted and preparing to slaughter Beatrice, Harrison saw an opportunity to play the hero and curry favor with the northern ruler. "King Vargas, apologies," Lord Harrison called out, marching toward their table with a placating, oily smile. "This wretched girl has clearly overstepped her bounds. She is a low-born nuisance, the daughter of a disgraced traitor. Allow my guards to remove this trash from your presence, so you may dine in peace." Harrison reached out, his hand snapping out to grab Beatrice's arm and haul her out of the chair. He never made contact, faster than the human eye could track. Kaelin moved. There was a sickening crack of splintering wood as the heavy oak table was shoved violently forward. Kaelin's massive hand shot out, not striking Harrison, but catching the Lord by the throat. The entire hall erupted in gasps and screams, nobles scrambling backward in a panic. Kaelin rose to his feet, lifting Lord Harrison entirely off the ground. With a single arm, the human lord's feet dangled, his face instantly turning a mottled purple as he clawed desperately at the thick, scarred fingers, crushing his windpipe. "Do not!" Kaelin snarled, his voice echoing off the stone walls like a crack of thunder. "Ever attempt to touch what is mine." The word sent a shock wave through the room. King Reginald half stood from his throne, pale and speechless. The northern guards, previously standing near the walls, drew their curved blades in unison, the sound of steel singing through the air. Beatrice sat frozen in her chair, staring up at the towering Alpha. What is his? Kaelin threw Lord Harrison to the side like a broken rag doll. The Lord crashed into a neighboring table, sending silver platters and wine pitchers clattering to the floor before collapsing in a wheezing, groaning heap. The Alpha did not spare the fallen man a second glance. The terrifying, murderous aura radiating from him began to recede the moment he turned his back on the crowd and looked down at Beatrice. To the absolute bewilderment of the Riverdale court, the bloodthirsty monster of the North reached down with unexpected gentleness. He unfastened the heavy, fur-lined cloak from his own shoulders. Stepping closer, he wrapped the massive garment around Beatrice's shivering frame. The sheer weight and heat of it instantly enveloping her in his scent of pine and raw power. He braced his hands on the arms of her chair, leaning down until they were eye to eye, effectively shielding her from the stares of the terrified court. "You are freezing," Kaelin said softly, the lethal violence in his eyes replaced by a burning, possessive warmth. He reached up, his rough thumb lightly brushing a stray lock of hair behind her ear. What are you doing?" Beatrice breathed, trembling beneath the heavy furs. "Taking you home," Kaelin replied simply, his golden eyes blazing. "The peace treaty with this wretched kingdom can wait. I have just found my queen." The great hall of Riverdale devolved into absolute pandemonium. Women shrieked, lords reached for decorative swords they barely knew how to use, and the royal guard surged forward, their halberds lowered toward the Alpha King. Yet Kaelin Vargas did not flinch. He stood tall, keeping Beatrice firmly tucked behind his massive frame, the heavy fur cloak shielding her from the chaos. King Reginald, his face a portrait of apoplectic fury, descended the steps of his dais. "King Vargas, you go too far. You are a guest under my roof, bound by the rights of hospitality. You cannot simply abduct a ward of my court." Kaelin turned, his amber eyes locking onto the human king. The low, vibrating growl that emanated from the Alpha's chest was not loud, but it rattled the goblets on the tables. "She is no longer a ward of your court, Reginald," Kaelin's voice boomed, carrying a lethal, icy calm. "She is my mate, by the ancient laws of the Frost Marches, laws your ancestors agreed to respect. She belongs to the North now. If your guards take one more step, the treaty is dead, and my armies will paint the snow with your entire royal line before the sun sets." Silence crashed back over the room. The Northern Guards, their curved steel gleaming in the torchlight, shifted into a defensive formation around Kaelin and Beatrice. King Reginald looked at the feral warriors, then down at Lord Harrison Croft, who was still gasping on the floor, clutching his bruised throat. The human king swallowed his pride. He knew the truth. Riverdale's armies were soft, bloated by decades of peace and corruption. They stood no chance against the lycanthropes. With a jerky, trembling motion, Reginald raised a hand, signaling his guards to stand down. "Take her, then," Reginald spat, trying to salvage his dignity. "But know that you take the daughter of a traitor. She carries nothing but a disgraced name." "Her name," Kaelin replied, turning his back on the human monarch with ultimate disdain, "is worth more than your entire kingdom." Without another word, Kaelin placed a large, warm hand on the small of Beatrice's back, guiding her through the parted sea of terrified nobles. As they passed the rear pillars, Beatrice locked eyes with Lady Genevieve. The cruel, noble woman's face was utterly devoid of color, her previous arrogance shattered into visceral terror. The dare had backfired in the most spectacular, world-altering way possible. The journey out of Riverdale was a blur of freezing wind and the rhythmic thunder of hooves, Beatrice was ushered into a massive iron-reinforced carriage bearing the crest of the Frost Marches, a snarling wolf's head crowned in ice. Calen climbed in after her, filling the enclosed space with his overwhelming presence and the scent of wild pine. As the carriage lurched forward, leaving the only home she had ever known behind, the adrenaline finally left Beatrice's system. She pulled the thick fur cloak tighter around herself, her breathing ragged. "You are safe," Calen said softly. He sat on the opposite bench, his large hands resting on his knees. He deliberately kept his distance, offering her the space a frightened animal would need. "Why did you do that?" Beatrice whispered, her voice trembling. "Why me? You could have any woman, any lycanthrope. I am a disgraced human." Calen's jaw tightened. He leaned forward slightly, the amber light in his eyes softening into something profoundly raw. "Do you know how a mate bond works, Beatrice?" She shook her head, terrified yet captivated. "It is not a choice," he explained, his rough voice wrapping around her like a physical weight. "It is a biological imperative, a claiming of the soul. For 30 years I have lived in silence. When you walked toward me, the air shifted. The blood in my veins stopped flowing for me and started flowing for you. I smelled the terror on you, the cruelty of those people, and it took every ounce of my restraint not to tear the throats out of everyone in that room." Beatrice stared at him, her mind struggling to process the impossible reality. "But my father—" "They will kill him. Harrison Croft holds his debt. Because I left, Harrison will throw him in the freezing dungeons." A dark, dangerous smile played on Calen's lips. It was a predator's smile, full of sharp teeth and cunning. "Do not worry about Lord Arton," Calen murmured. Beatrice's heart skipped a beat. "You know his name?" "I know everything that happens in Riverdale, Beatrice," Calen said, his tone shifting from a protective mate to a calculating king. "I have spies in your castle walls. The treaty tonight was a farce. I only attended that wretched feast to create a distraction." Beatrice's eyes widened. "A distraction for what?" "For my shadows to breach the lower levels of Riverdale," Calen revealed smoothly. "Your father was never a traitor, little bird. He was an honest man who stumbled upon a conspiracy. He discovered that Lord Harrison and King Reginald have been illegally mining silver in the neutral territories, forging weapons to wipe out my kind in a surprise attack. They framed your father for treason to silence him." The revelation hit Beatrice like a physical blow. Her father's sudden disgrace, the sudden influx of wealth for the Croft family, the cruel way Genevieve had targeted her, it all slotted into place perfectly. "Where is he?" she gasped, leaning forward. "He is safe," Calen promised, his eyes burning with absolute certainty. "My men extracted him from the dungeons while I was strangling Lord Harrison. He is already on horseback, riding for the safety of the northern borders." Tears, hot and fast, spilled over Beatrice's cheeks. For years, she had carried the shame and terror of her father's impending death. In a single hour, this terrifying, feral beast of a man had given her back her life, her honor, and her family. She looked at Calen, truly looking past the scars and the intimidating bulk. "You saved him." Calen's gaze darkened. "I protect what is mine, Beatrice. And you and your blood are mine to protect now." The stronghold of Ethelgard did not look like the barbaric dens the human histories described. Carved directly into the side of a towering, snow-capped mountain. The fortress was a masterpiece of obsidian and dark iron, lit by roaring braziers that cast a warm, golden glow against the ice. When the carriage arrived, Beatrice was not dragged in as a prisoner. Calen offered his hand, and when she took it, the entire courtyard of fearsome northern warriors dropped to one knee. The snow crunched beneath their armored boots as hundreds of lycanthropes bowed their heads in silent, fierce reverence. They were not bowing to Calen. They were bowing to her. "Welcome home, my queen," a massive warrior with a scarred brow murmured as they passed. Inside the great hall of Ethelgard, the air was warm, smelling of roasted meats and rich spices. But Beatrice had eyes for only one thing. Standing by a massive stone hearth, wrapped in thick furs and holding a steaming mug, was a frail, older man with a shock of white hair. "Father!" Beatrice broke into a run, her ragged blue dress tangling around her legs. Artan Alden dropped his mug, catching his daughter as she collided with him. He wept openly, burying his face in her hair. "Beatrice, my brave girl," Artan choked out, holding her tight. "I thought I would never see you again." Calen stood a few paces back, his hands clasped behind his back, allowing them their moment. He watched Beatrice with an unwavering, protective intensity. Over the next 2 weeks, Beatrice's transformation was absolute. The frightened, starved girl of Riverdale shed her past like dead skin. The lycanthrope women dressed her in gowns of rich midnight velvet and silver embroidery. She dined on the finest foods and sat beside Calen at council meetings. She learned that the monsters of the North were fiercely loyal, deeply honorable, and vastly more civilized than the treacherous, backstabbing lords of Riverdale. And she learned about Calen. Beneath his lethal exterior was a man who carried the weight of his people's survival, a man who treated her with a gentle reverence that left her breathless. When he looked at her, he did not see a debtor's daughter. He saw an equal. But the past was not finished with them. On the eve of the first full moon, a heavily battered rider arrived at the gates of Ethelgard. It was an emissary from King Reginald, bearing a frantic, groveling letter. The northern spy's extraction of Artan Alden had left a trail. In his panic, King Reginald had attempted to execute Lord Harrison Croft, blaming the silver smuggling entirely on the Croft family to appease the Alpha King. In retaliation, the Crofts had incited a bloody civil war within Riverdale's walls. The kingdom was tearing itself apart, and Lady Genevieve was begging for sanctuary, offering to sell out her own brother in exchange for her life. Beatrice sat on a throne of carved obsidian, a circlet of frosted silver resting on her brow. Calen stood beside her, his hand resting casually on the arm of her throne. He looked down at the kneeling, trembling emissary, but he did not speak. Instead, the Alpha King turned to Beatrice. "They are your people, my queen," Calen rumbled, his voice echoing in the cavernous hall. "What is your judgment?" The entire court of Ethelgard held its breath, waiting for the human queen's verdict. Beatrice looked at the emissary, remembering the cold floors of Riverdale, the cruel giggles of the noble women, and the utter despair she had felt when Genevieve forced her to walk toward the beast. She remembered her father rotting in a cell while the king drank wine from silver goblets. She did not feel pity. She felt the icy resolve of the North flowing through her veins. "Lady Genevieve dared me to walk into the jaws of a beast," Beatrice said, her voice clear, cold, and ringing with absolute authority. She believed she was sending me to my death. Tell King Reginald that Ethelgard offers no sanctuary to traitors." Beatrice leaned forward, the firelight catching the silver crown on her head. "Tell them that the North will close its borders. We will let the wolves of Riverdale tear each other to pieces. And when there is nothing left but ash and snow, we will march down and reclaim the lands that were stolen from us." The emissary blanched, scrambling backward before fleeing the hall. A collective, vibrating roar of approval erupted from the lycanthrope warriors in the room, shaking the very foundations of the fortress. They slammed their fists against their armored chests, howling their loyalty to the Winter Queen, who had finally shown them the strength they revered. Amidst the roaring crowd, Cailan looked down at Beatrice. His amber eyes were dark, dilated, and blazing with a raw, consuming pride. He reached out, his rough hand cupping her jaw, tilting her face up to meet his. "You are magnificent," he whispered, before bending down and pressing his lips to hers in a kiss that promised both ruin to their enemies and absolute eternal devotion. The human court of Riverdale had tried to break her with a cruel joke. Instead, they had handed the king the one weapon he was missing, a queen with the strategic mind of a noble, the ruthless heart of a survivor, and the absolute power of the frost marches at her back. What started as a cruel aristocratic dare transformed a disgraced human into the most powerful lycanthrope queen in history. Beatrice didn't just survive the ruthless Alpha King. She conquered his heart and orchestrated the ultimate revenge against her tormentors. If this tale of vengeance, fated mates, and thrilling royal drama kept you on the edge of your seat, smash that like button. Don't forget to subscribe and share this video with your fellow fantasy romance addicts for more epic stories.